Good afternoon and welcome into 247 Sports Live. I'm Grace Remington, helping you stay updated on all the happenings in college sports in these spring and summer seasons. Here's what we got on tap today. We have brand new intel on EA Sports College Football 25. Texas, one of the favorites to win the national championship this year at 8-1. We're going to preview their 2024 season, and we're talking some hoops. One of the most intriguing prospects in the upcoming NBA draft, Bronny James. Will he go boom or bust? Let's start right there, okay? The 2024 NBA draft centers around a storyline we haven't quite heard before. The most closely watched prospect is a guy who isn't a lottery pick or even a first rounder. But when you're the son of LeBron James, the name on the back of the jersey is what drives interest. Now, as Bronny James comes off a recent trip to the NBA Combine, our director of scouting, Adam Finkelstein, joins us with more. Fink, thanks for being here today. Bronny, one of the 78 players invited to the Combine. You got to see him up close. What's your assessment?
You know, it was very similar to what I thought last year at the McDonald's All-American game. There was a lot of talk going into it that he was only invited because of his name, because of his dad. But I thought that he proved he belonged, much like he did last year. Athletically, he tested as well as we expected. He also measured, quite frankly, like we expected, which was notably under what he was listed at USC last year. USC listed him at 6'4". He measured in at 6'1.5" without shoes on, which is also notable. So overall, I thought that this was a very solid performance. He was much better in the second day of games than he was in the first, and he walked away showing that he is a legit NBA draft prospect, regardless of what exactly got him into this point.
Now, obviously, Bronny has had to live under the shadow of his superstar father, but he stated after the Combine he wants to come up into the league by his own doing. So, Fink, what role could you see him playing?
Well, it's really just hard, quite frankly, to separate him from his dad, not just because of the fact that he's his son, but because his dad has been talking about playing with him for almost 3 years now. I mean, this goes back to multiple interviews where he said kind of his crowning achievement, or the last crowning achievement, if you will, of his career would be to play side by side with his son, Bronny. That led to a lot of speculation that the Lakers would be the final destination for him. I'm on record as saying I believe he will be in the Lakers organization last year. I think the agency, Clutch, which is run by Rich Paul, who's not only LeBron's agent, but his close friend, I think they are lining things up, if you followed this, to make sure he ends up a Laker. The reality, though, is that I'm not sure he is NBA ready. I do think long-term there's a path for him to be a serviceable NBA player. But if you're expecting anywhere near the type of career that his dad had, you're just going to be really mistaken. And to Bronny's credit, he's even acknowledged that he's going to model his game after somebody like Drew Holiday, a guy who plays both ends of the floor, gets it done defensively, moves the ball, and makes open shots. He's kind of shown the awareness that, hey, I'm not the alpha or the dynamic creator that my dad is. So from that perspective, you give him credit. And I should also say, he was very impressive when he spoke to the media, very self-aware, very articulate. It was really impressive to see him in that setting. But from a sheer basketball perspective, the expectation should be much different than anything his dad ever went through.
Yeah, we saw a lot of growth from him at the Combine. Given Bronny's skill set and then his father's want to play for him, which teams do you think could be interested in James Jr.?
Well, here's what I'll say. Again, I think he's going to play for the Lakers. The news in the last month, or even the last couple of weeks, first, you saw a headline from Rich Paul saying that they weren't going to accept a two-way contract. They wanted a fully guaranteed deal. And just for context, the vast majority of second-round picks, or at least a good percentage of them, get two-way contracts. Two-way contracts are not fully guaranteed. They pay about $500,000 a year. And it's only a select few second-round picks who receive that fully guaranteed deal. Rich Paul saying he wants one of those. They've also now had reports in the media that there are about 10 teams that want to work Bronny out, but they're only going to do workouts with two, with the Lakers and with Phoenix. So you put those things together, and on top of that, the fact that LeBron is approaching his own free agency, which gives him more leverage than ever, as if he needed any more, and defying aging at the same time. So a few years ago, we thought maybe he's only got 1 year left at this point. Right now, it looks like he could play multiple more years at a very high level. So I say this just to summarize why I believe that Bronny James is going to be a member of the Lakers organization. I just think LeBron has been saying this repeatedly for years now. They're trying to walk that back a little bit in recent months, but all of the information that has surfaced in the recent weeks seems to support that initial claim that LeBron wants to play with his son. And quite frankly, he has all the leverage needed to make it happen.
Obviously, LeBron has a decision to make, though everything you're saying sounds like it's Lakers or nothing. But you've also mentioned Bronny as a developmental prospect. So given those two facts, how likely is it that we see LeBron and Bronny on the same team next season?
I think it's likely. As I said, now team and organization are two different things. Could the Lakers take him and, send him to their G League affiliate? I think that's very possible. I do believe he will be in the Lakers organization. And to be clear, this isn't me. I'm just connecting the dots that are very public here. This is not a sourced report. But the other thing I would add just about LeBron's free agency is there was another report just prior to the NBA draft deadline this year that Golden State made an attempt to acquire LeBron James and was ultimately told he preferred to stay in Los Angeles. And so while there are recent reports about both LeBron and Savannah saying they kind of miss Miami, kind of some of the talking points that you usually hear when LeBron is looking to make a point going into whether it's free agency or trying to drive a certain transaction or two, I think it's pretty clear LeBron intends to stay with the Lakers. And so that's gonna really preclude anybody else from trying to even think about drafting Bronny in an attempt to lure LeBron to join him. I think this is LeBron is going to be in LA, and if he wants to play with his son, it will be for the Lakers.
All right, the NBA draft begins June 26. Our guy Adam Finkelstein keeping us up to date until then and throughout the calendar year. Thanks, Fink. And of course, you can catch Fink every week on the 247 Sports College Basketball Show. It's streaming live on the 247 Sports YouTube channel or on Twitter. You can watch every Tuesday at 5 Eastern. All right, it's the news of the summer. EA Sports College Football 25 is here, and it launches July 19th. We have the trailer, we've had graphics and traditions teasers, and now tomorrow, EA Sports is releasing a YouTube premiere with a gameplay deep dive. This will be the first time you get to see gameplay footage. Our friend Bud Elliott of the Cover 3 podcast joins us now. He was at EA headquarters in Orlando for a preview of College Football 25. So, Bud, you got to play the game and see some of its features. Can you share with us that experience?
I did. Yeah, Grace, good to see you. It'll be everybody else's first time playing, not mine. That was actually really cool to do down there in Orlando. So as somebody, I'm not a big gamer outside of sports games, and I am someone who kept playing NCAA 14, the last version of the game, before they had to stop making it due to the lawsuits. The things I think you'll notice right off the bat, the gameplay is much more smooth. They've had 10 years to work on this, and it's not just like some Madden version, right? They pulled guys off of the team that had been still developing this, kind of behind the scenes for a long time. The guys who make this game are really, really nerdy about college football. Like, they think about the stuff that I think those of us who work in college football would think to put in, right? They know exactly the formation of all the cheerleaders and the band members as your team runs out of the tunnel, right? So if you're going through the T in Tennessee, they know what direction they turn, okay? Like, they know what song is played when and why. And maybe like your team only plays a certain song against a certain opponent, or maybe a certain version of that song. They went to Vancouver during COVID to kind of, I think, get around some restrictions, and they built literally a hill to do motion capture for Clemson. They built a horse to do motion capture for Florida State's Renegade, the horse that Osceola rides out there on. Their mantra was every team is somebody's favorite team, and they want to make sure that every person playing it has a unique experience playing with their team.
I love that you said it was nerdy guys building this game, because I read each of the 134 schools in the game has its own unique playbook rather than just generic plays and styles that could apply to any school. I'm not a gamer myself either, Bud. I know, huge surprise. But that actually piqued my interest a little bit. But what I want to ask you next is, A lot of fans of the game on Twitter were a little bit disappointed that Road to Glory will not feature your created players starting in high school, moving through the recruitment, getting NIL deals, etc. What have you heard from EA about why it left those pieces out?
So when I was playing the game, the last version of the NCAA 14, I was not a big Road to Glory player. So I didn't ask a lot of questions about Road to Glory. It just seemed kind of like an afterthought because everybody I played with played Dynasty, right? Like we'd play with our friends in online Dynasty. Like that's just, I thought, a better version of the side game to play. I think people will be mostly happy with Road to Glory. I'm not pitching for them. I'm not on the payroll with EA, but the high school season is just 1 year. And there actually is an NIL component. They just can't call it NIL. Remember that when this game was being developed, a lot of it had to be made before we had the Tennessee-West Virginia case, which invalidated some of the restrictions on NIL. You also had to get all the schools to sign up. And while you and I know, because we work in the sport, we cover the sport every day, that most of these guys actually are on just basically like pay-for-play payroll from collectives, the schools still don't want to actually admit that. Like they're still fighting to say these guys are not employees. So if you want to get the schools to actually sign off on you making a college ball video game, it's probably best that we don't just be like, hey, here's this player's NIL salary to come play for us, and you can come play for me if I give you $30,000 more. But there is a catch, and the catch is your brand exposure value. Get it? Brand exposure, because that's what NIL really is about. And trust me, that does factor into Road to Glory and the Dynasty. You got to allocate your brand exposure points, and then like maybe in future years we'll have a little more just kind of nakedly NIL aspect. But there is a little NIL in there. And I'm sorry I didn't ask as many questions about Road to Glory. I did not think that they would get blowback on not being able to play high school year in Road to Glory.
One thing fans are still skeptical about, though, and you kind of mentioned this, is it being a Madden reskin. What differences do you see?
So it's not just a bunch of guys they pulled off the Madden team to make a college game. I think that's important. The game is definitely crazier. Because let's face it, like part of the zaniness and the craziness of college football is the great plays, but it's also the mistakes these guys make, right? Like think about back in 2013 when Auburn beat Alabama, not the miracle in Jordan Hare, but like the tip pass, or not the kick six, but the one where they beat Georgia. Like that's two defensive backs making a terrible play, running into each other, and the ball popping up and landing in Ricardo Lewis's hands. So I think the mistakes that players make are much greater magnitude. Home field advantage is a much bigger deal in college football than it is in the NFL, and that is reflected in the game as well, as is experience. Everybody in the NFL is a pro player, but the gap between the best college player and the worst college player is much more significant than the gap between the best pro player and the best, or the worst, the worst pro player. So I think you'll see like big differences between the best and worst players. How do they handle those environments? How much experience do they have in the system? I mean, you may go up to the line with your hotshot freshman who played pretty well at home against Miami, Ohio, and some other cupcake, but then he's got to go to Neyland Stadium at night. You hit the route preview button, may not see all the routes there, might have to remember what the routes were. It's tricky.
I love how realistic this game is sounding, although I have to say, Bud, Miami, Ohio is not a cupcake. Don't call my alma mater that. One more question for you.
You Red Hawk?
You knew that.
Oh, that team was so good to me betting last year. Oh, my gosh. Miami, Ohio, and under all day. Yeah.
Oh, man. And everyone's poaching their players now, but that's a combo for another time. Okay, one more question for you, Bud. Dynasty mode is one of the more anticipated modes for fans. What can we expect in this game mode?
I think this was probably like the most nerdy thing that they did. They really just first of all, they put blue chip ratio in there, which was pretty cool. So definitely check that feature out. When you're got to have that high blue chip ratio if you want to win the national title. But they really delved into the recruiting aspect quite a bit. There's like 4 rows, maybe like 20 different factors that could matter to a recruit. And so you have to scout them and put that time in to figure out, okay, which factors do they actually care about as recruits? And then you'll find out, you know what? Oh, my school has this. My school doesn't have this. There's also pipeline features. Maybe areas that your school or your coach has traditionally done well at. Maybe you can recruit a little better out of those areas. Maybe certain states produce different types of players in different amounts at certain positions. And also your coach, he can't be Nick Saban for the job, okay? You have to either choose a motivator developer track, a recruiter track, or a X&O track, and then you can sort of slowly work to make the other areas better. But it will take a lot longer than it used to. So which is kind of realistic. Like, most people are not Nick Saban from the word go.
All right. Cool stuff from EA Sports. Bud Elliott, thanks so much. You can catch him over on the Cover 3 podcast. Summer school is starting. That's always a great program. Go give it a listen. And for more college football news and coverage, of course, check out 247sports.com.
We didn't come this far just to come this far.
Play action. Over the middle, caught. Touchdown, Texas.
Texas has got the best quarterback room in the SEC, probably the best quarterback room in the country.
Handoff, Baxter flips it back. Ewers throws, downfield wide open. J.P. Sanders, touchdown, Texas. How about a little trickeration for you?
Josh Pate, that Texas quarterback room, best in the SEC, maybe one of the best in the country. Henry of Horns247 joins us now with more. Eric, the plan for a long time has been Quinn Ewers in 2024, Arch Manning in 2025. What has to happen for us to see some type of quarterback battle this season?
Oh, man, of course, Grace. Right when I thought I could make it an entire offseason without quarterback controversy talk. No, I'm kidding. I knew that question was coming. No, to your question, what would have to happen? Quite frankly, there's no feasible scenario that can happen between now and fall in order for Arch Manning to usurp Quinn Ewers on the depth chart. It's funny you asked that because Steve Sarkisian was asked that question after the second signing period. He was asked, hey, is there an opportunity for Arch Manning to come in and possibly compete for the role? And Sark almost incredulously kind of looked at the question and was like, seriously, this again? There's no way. This is Quinn Ewers' team, a third-year starter. Quite frankly, when you take a look, and in my opinion, Grace, Quinn Ewers is the most undervalued player in all of college football. You take a look at what he did when he was on the field last year. If he had not missed the 2 games that he did due to the sprained AC joint, you're talking about a player that would have thrown for over 4,000 yards, have been right around 30 touchdowns, still under double-digit interceptions. And quite frankly, in my opinion, one of the things that makes Quinn Ewers' value just that much of a value for the Longhorns is I don't think there's a game this year that they walk into a stadium and they don't have the best quarterback on the field. That includes Carson Beck at Georgia. So in my mind, the only thing that Arch Manning has to do is continue the thing that Steve Sarkisian has asked of him, and that's to continue his progression as a quarterback. Just one quick note I'll leave you with this is during the spring game, a lot was made of his 3-touchdown performance where he threw for 355 yards. Steve Sarkisian, about 7 days, a week prior to that performance, spoke with the Austin media and said, hey, one of the things that I challenged Arch Manning to do is something that a lot of young quarterbacks struggle with, which is not to use their legs to evade the pocket, horizontally, but step up in the pocket vertically and make the throws, to deliver the throws. Because we've all seen Arch Manning's legs and what he can do in terms of using his legs to create plays. But just be that quarterback that can step up in the pocket and deliver throws, and he did that in the spring game. So he's the QB2. Quinn Ewers is the QB1.
As Texas moves to the SEC, FanDuel has their wins total listed at 10.5. They have the third shortest odds to win the national championship. So expectations nationally are as high as they could be. But what about locally? What are the expectations for this move to the SEC coming out of Austin?
Well, listen, if the expectations nationally are 10.5, the expectations here in Austin are just through the roof. And rightfully so. Again, when you take a look, let's just start in 2023. I think that was the year that really solidified it for the folks here in Austin, Texas fans, Longhorn Nation, who've been longing to be back. I've told myself I wouldn't use that phrase here, but, hey, here we are, right? Long really be back. The fact that Texas answered the call each time when they were challenged by each Big 12 team. Steve Sarkisian talked about the fact that, hey, with this being our farewell tour in the Big 12, we're going to get every team's best shot. We're going to be every Big 12 team's Super Bowl. And outside of the Oklahoma game, in which, quite frankly, had they just executed better in the red zone, they would have won that game. They answered the test each time. I think winning that game in Alabama proved something to the players on the roster. And there's still a fair amount of guys who are returning from last year's group, even notwithstanding the amount of guys, double-digit guys who were drafted in this last year's draft. So to your question, what are the expectations? It's to come out and win the SEC year one. And quite frankly, you take a look at the schedule, you don't get Tennessee. You don't get Missouri. You don't get LSU. You don't get Ole Miss. Those are all teams that were, ranked in the top 25 and were double-digit win teams last year. The teams they do get, Vandy, Arkansas, a rebuilding Mississippi State, Texas A&M, of course, you renew that rivalry, and of course, it's a dangerous game, but still a team that's rebuilding. So even when you take a look at their SEC schedule, they got, no disrespect to the programs I mentioned, but the lower end of the SEC this year. So outside of that stretch where you go Oklahoma, Georgia, you expect Texas to just really be able to impose their will on some of these teams that they're facing in conference.
Yeah, it's looking good for them. Now, one of the big storylines after spring ball, and this came from Sarkisian himself, was depth at defensive line, specifically tackle. What type of progress has been made or needs to be made in that area?
It's the $1 million question. Listen, when you have T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, right, like two of the top defensive tackles in the nation, you're not going to replace those guys. Sark's been open about it. Listen, we can't replace them. What we can do is try to get a certain amount of the value. And Grace, my position has been, if they can get 75 to 80% of what they got last year, they're in good shape. That starts with Alfred Collins, a fifth-year guy who, quite frankly, is a 5-star recruit by 247Sports, has all the potential in the world, just need to have his motor really come through and be consistent game in, game out. He answered that call in a reserve role last year. They're looking for him to step up and be a starter. He and Vernon Broughton. Steve Sarkisian said that he was confident and was comfortable with his starters, but those two guys will head the group. Behind them, a slew of transfers. They brought in Tia Savea in the first signing period, and then even after the start of spring ball, you bring in a Bill Norton from Arizona, you bring in a Jermaine Lole from Louisville. What that says to me, Grace, is okay, the guys that were on our roster, while sure we're happy to have them, they're not performing up to expectation when you bring in two defensive tackles post spring ball. So you got kind of puts the spotlight on guys like Sadir Mitchell, a 4-star recruit from New Jersey, guys like Aaron Bryant, even Alex January, a true freshman coming in. Can those guys answer the call? But all things considered, they're going to kind of moneyball this thing. They're going to kind of say, hey, we have to play 6 defensive tackles. Can we get 6 guys as a group to kind of give us 75 to 80% of what T'Vondre and Byron did? If they can do that, they'll be in phenomenal shape.
I was listening to an episode of the Horns 247 podcast. You and Chip Brown do a great job, but you guys mentioned with all this wide receiver talent coming in, how do they even get all the guys onto the field? So I want to ask you players to watch. I know you're going to include the wide receivers, but who should we watch in 2024?
Well, here's the thing, Grace, right? When you get a raise like Steve Sarkisian did, those are $10 million salary issues. So Sark will have to figure out how to get those receivers on the field. But in terms of guys to watch, I'll throw out a handful. One, we'll start with Jaden Blue. Even though you're talking about a running back who only rushed, for 398 yards last year, someone who really broke out, had a 100-yard performance in the Texas Tech game. You saw him perform well in the Sugar Bowl, and the expectations with he and C.J. Baxter, quite frankly, are through the roof. There are a lot of people here, if you talk to some of the coaches, who believe that they can have the best 1-2 running back punch in the nation. I know those are lofty expectations, but Jaden Blue is a guy to keep an eye on. Next, you go to the offensive line, you look at Cam Williams, who's probably going to take over for longtime starter at right tackle Christian Jones. He started one game last year when Christian was injured. Can he protect that right side of the offensive line? Of course, Quinn Ewers blindsides the left side, and that's in great shape with Kelvin Banks Jr., but can you solidify that right side with Cam Williams? Then you flip to the defensive side. I mentioned Alfred Collins. If he's a guy who, again, is so massively, talented and potent, and the potential is just there. If he can bring that game in, game out, snap in, snap out for 40, 45 snaps a game, I'm not saying you're getting a Byron Murphy or T'Vondre Sweat, but you're getting someone who is just a supremely talented player and someone who's certainly capable of being an all-conference player in his own right. The last two guys to round out, I'd take a look at the secondary, a revamped secondary. Probably if you had to pick one weak spot, quote unquote weak spot of the Longhorns defense, it was the secondary last year, ranked 12th in the Big 12 in passing yards allowed. Look at safety Derek Williams Jr. He really emerged as a true freshman, someone who was part of a 5-player platoon at safety for Pete Kwiatkowski and the Texas defensive coordinator in the back end there. And by the end of the year, he was a starter, and Pro Football Focus ranked him as the best overall safety for Texas. He's a guy who's really emerging, I think, paired with Andrew Makuba as the 1-2 punch back there in safety, should be good. And last but not least, as I mentioned, the wide receiver room. It's going to be between, in my mind, Silas Bolden, Oregon State's leading receiver last year, he just arrived in Austin in the summer. Can he hit the ground running and make the type of impact that you would assume he can have in this offense? Because you have a 5-star recruit in Ryan Wingo. You have last year's top recruit, the receiver, in Jonte Cook, all pushing for playing time. And Steve Sarkisian is someone who his wide receiver rotation has been notoriously tight. It's been 3 guys. Even look at last year. It was Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. If he's going to expand that this year to possibly 4, who's going to be that 4th guy? Because you have Matt Golden, you have Isaiah Bond, and then, of course, Silas Bolden, Jonte Cook, Ryan Wingo. So who's going to be those guys at the receiver room? That'll be a position to kind of keep an eye on.
Eric Henry with the latest from Austin ahead of a huge year for the Texas Longhorns. Thanks so much, Eric. And for more Longhorns news and analysis, be sure you check out horns247.com. Our team out in 40 Acres is keeping you up to date from practices, games, press conferences with the news you can't find anywhere else. That's horns247.com. And before you go, don't forget Unfiltered with Carl Reed and Smoke Dixon airs on Friday, and a new Friday show means we got a new guest. This time it's Kentucky Associate Head Coach Vince Morrow. You can watch tomorrow at 5 Eastern on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you back here soon.